The morning broke without ceremony, a thin gray light spilling over the ridges, catching the frost that had settled on the asphalt overnight. The highway was empty, stretching in both directions like a scar. No sound except the hum of wind through the guardrails. The bear came out of the tree line just after 6. He was old, his coat gone dull with mud and age, his shoulders heavy, his movements slow. A single yellow tag hung from his ear. Faded numbers, half rubbed off. He'd been caught once long ago when the Forest Service still bothered to count such things. Now, no one counted. He sniffed the air before stepping onto the pavement. It smelled of oil, salt, and the ghost of heat, all things that didn't belong to him. His claws clicked softly against the frozen surface. He moved carefully, testing each step like the road might shift beneath him. A car passed in the distance, somewhere far down the slope. The faint rising whine of tires, the world waking up. The bear paused, head tilted, listening. Then he kept walking. When he reached the median, he stopped. A torn plastic bag fluttered against the concrete divider, catching on his leg. He shook it loose and looked up. The sun was climbing, weak and low, just touching the tops of the spruce. The light made the frost on his fur glint faintly, like dusted silver. Across the highway, the forest waited. He crossed the last lane and disappeared into the brush, leaving only a few deep prints in the slush, perfect impressions that filled with water as the light warmed the ground. No one saw him. A mile up the road, Cal Bennett was pulling over to check a tire. He was late for work again, third time that month. And the radio in his truck was still tuned to static because the news never came through clear this far north. He bent down, his breath fogging in the cold, and noticed the prints in the snow just off the shoulder. Big ones. Fresh. Damn, he muttered. You're early this year. He followed them a few steps, squinting into the trees. He couldn't see anything but the blur of pines and the faint rise of mist over the ditch. Cal had grown up around here. He knew what it meant when bears started showing up this close to the road before spring. The forest was thin again, the winter too warm, the runoff too fast. He stood there for a moment, rubbing his hands together, listening to the wind and the guardrails. The sound reminded him of traffic even when there wasn't any. Behind him, a truck roared by, sending a burst of grit against his boots. He turned, watched it vanish down the long straightaway until the taillights were just two dull embers in the gray. When the silence came back, it felt heavier. Cal took a picture of the tracks with his phone, the kind of habit that felt like doing something, even when it wasn't. Then he got back in the truck, turned the key, and drove off toward town. Back in the trees, the bear moved through the undergrowth, with a kind of patience that belonged to things the world had stopped noticing. His breath steamed in the cold. Every sound, the click of twigs, the groan of ice breaking on a puddle, felt louder here, like the forest was still learning to wake up after the long dark. He came to the clearing near the old quarry, where the snow melted faster, where the earth held heat from the stones. There, he found what he hadn't known he was looking for: a pile of trash, food wrappers, a broken cooler, an empty water jug. Human things. The scent of salt and grease still clung to them. He nosed through it for a while, then sat back on his haunches. His tag caught the light again, a flash of yellow against his dark fur. The color looked wrong in this place. He raised his head, sniffed the air. Beyond the ridge, the hum of engines was starting again. The world was awake. The forest wasn't. The bear stood, turned north, and kept moving. The frost cracked under his weight, the ground softening beneath the first touch of sun. By the time the highway filled with traffic, there was no sign of him, only those prints in the slush, already fading as the light grew stronger. No one stopped. No one looked. The day went on the way days do, thoughtless, fast, bright. And somewhere in the hills, a bear kept walking north, where the snow was still clean and the world, for a little while longer, didn't notice him at all. The second morning broke soft and colorless. A thin fog drifted over the valley, and the highway looked almost peaceful from above, a silver line running through frost and pine. The snow on the shoulders had hardened overnight, gray with salt. The world hummed faintly with distance. Faraway engines, the echo of birds that hadn't yet returned. Cal Bennett stood by his truck at the same turnout as the day before. His breath hung low in the air, curling against the cold. The bear's tracks were still there, though dulled now by melt and wind. He followed them again. The prince cut down through the ditch and into the trees, where the ground was soft from the thaw. They moved steady, purposeful, as if the animal knew exactly where it was going. Cal ducked under a branch and felt the temperature change. Colder, stiller, the way it always felt beneath pines that hadn't seen sun in months. He found the first sign of him near the river bend. The remains of a deer, half buried in snow. Not much left, but enough to tell the story. Ribs cracked clean, hide torn. Bears didn't hunt in February, not like this. Hunger had woken him too early. Cal crouched, touched the ice around the carcass. It was fresh, maybe 12 hours. Christ, he muttered, standing again. The air smelled faintly of iron and damp bark. A crow called once, high above, and then nothing. He scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, just fog and shadow. He turned back toward the road, but his eyes caught on something half hidden in the brush, a shape too neat to be natural. He stepped closer. A piece of fabric. Blue nylon, torn. He pulled it free. A camping pack strap, frayed at one end, the buckle still attached. He turned it in his hand, looking at the pattern of scratches on the metal. Someone had been here. He looked down again at the bear's prints. They circled the spot, wide, careful, then disappeared toward the riverbank. The water there was open, dark, slow, steam rising where the current ran shallow over stones. Cal followed until he reached the edge. The mud was thick and soft. Another set of tracks joined the bear's. Boots, maybe 2 days old, heading the same direction. He felt a cold crawl up his spine. By afternoon, the fog burned off, and the sun finally broke through, pale and reluctant. Cal drove into town, the radio still dead, the road almost empty. The diner lights were on, though, and he stopped there, like he always did when he needed to think. Inside, the heat felt too warm, too human. The smell of bacon and old coffee filled the air. "Morning, Cal," said Martha from behind the counter. She poured him a cup before he asked, "You look like you've seen a ghost." He rubbed his hands together. "Bear's awake." Her eyebrows lifted. "Already? Big one, tagged. He crossed the highway 2 nights ago." She shook her head. "You call fish and game?" He hesitated. "They won't come. Not for one bear. Still, you should tell them." He stared out the window at the hills beyond town. "Yeah, maybe." When he left, the light was already fading. The clouds rolled back in from the west, low and bruised. He drove slow along the highway, eyes scanning the tree line. Somewhere near mile marker 42, he pulled over again. The snow there was churned up, not new, but recent enough to catch his attention. He stepped out and crouched beside the guardrail. The prints were deep this time, heavier. They led from the forest across the road again, right through the median. He looked south, where the highway curved toward the town's edge. That's where they were headed. He stood, heart pounding slow but heavy. "You're moving closer," he said quietly. A truck passed, throwing a burst of grit against his coat. When it was gone, the silence returned, thicker than before. He looked back at the tracks, then at the trees, their edges lost in mist. He had the sudden sense that he wasn't alone, that something stood just out of sight, watching, breathing the same cold air. He turned toward the sound of breaking branches. A shadow moved in the gray. Massive, slow, deliberate. The bear. Cal froze. The animal stepped into view no more than 30 feet away. Its fur was darker now, damp, its head low. The yellow tag caught a sliver of dying light. Neither moved. Cal's breath came shallow. The bear huffed once, a low, steady exhale that steamed in the cold. Then it turned, crossed the ditch, and vanished into the pines. The silence after felt enormous. Cal stood there a long time, the wind cold on his face, watching the trees sway. Then he whispered, "You're not supposed to be here yet." But the truth was simpler. The world had changed, and no one had noticed. He walked back to his truck, leaving his own prints beside the bear's, almost the same size in the half-frozen mud. 2 travelers on the same path, moving through a country that no longer had room for either of them. The sun dropped below the ridge. The wind rose again. The world went on as it always did without looking back. By the 3rd morning, the snow had melted from the highway completely, leaving the asphalt slick and dark, streaked with salt. The nights were still cold, but the days were longer now, and the thaw had come too fast. The forest was waking up unevenly, patches of brown ground showing through frost, rivulets of water running down from the ridges, the smell of wet bark and old smoke. Cal Bennett was back out again before sunrise. He hadn't slept much, kept seeing the bear in the dark behind his eyelids, that slow, deliberate movement through the fog. There was nothing threatening about it, but something had settled under his skin, the kind of quiet dread that doesn't come from danger, but from understanding you've seen something you weren't supposed to. He parked at the same turnout, killed the engine, and listened. The valley was still half asleep. Somewhere far away, a bird called, thin and uncertain. The bear's tracks were gone now, washed away by meltwater and tire spray, but the memory of them stayed, heavy, real. Cal crossed the guardrail, boots crunching on the frozen edge of ditch water, and made his way into the trees again. The air changed the instant he stepped off the road. It was colder here, quieter. The smell of sap mixed with the faint rot of thawing leaves. He found the trail by instinct more than sight. Bent grass, broken twigs, claw marks on the bark of a birch. The bear had passed through again, not long ago. Cal followed slowly, careful not to make noise. The forest wasn't dense here. The trees were tall, spaced wide apart, light filtering through like smoke. He could see the river glinting between the trunks ahead. When he reached the bank, he stopped. The bear had been there, no doubt. The mud was torn where paws had sunk deep, water still pooled in the hollows. A fish carcass lay nearby, stripped, half-eaten. Cal crouched beside it. Still hungry, he murmured. He looked upriver, where the current curved around the bend. The sun was just touching the ridge now, turning the water to a band of white gold. For a second, he thought he saw movement, a dark shape just beyond the bend. But when he blinked, it was gone. He stayed there longer than he meant to, listening to the water, trying to name the feeling that had followed him since the first tracks. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. The bear was just doing what it had always done. Moving, surviving, looking for food, a place to sleep, a stretch of quiet. But the world around him had changed. The forest was smaller now. The noise reached farther, and maybe, Cal thought, that was why the sight of him on the highway had felt wrong. Not because the bear had crossed where he shouldn't, but because everything else had moved too far away. He drove to the ranger station that afternoon. It sat on the far side of town, next to the old mill, half empty now that most of the staff worked remotely. He found the door unlocked, the heater running low. Tom Hensley, one of the last wardens still stationed locally, was sitting at the back desk with a thermos and a stack of reports. His beard had gone white at the edges. He didn't look surprised to see Cal. "You look like you've been walking all night," Tom said. "Been following something," Cal answered. "Bear. Tagged. Big one." "Where?" "Crossed the highway near 42. I've seen him twice now. He's heading north, closer to the town line." Tom frowned. "That's too close. We've got kids walking that stretch to school." "I know." Cal rubbed his hands together. "I thought you folks should know." Tom leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking. "Truth is, we've had a few calls already. Chickens gone from a coop near the lumber road. Trash cans knocked over behind the motel. We figured coyotes." "Wasn't coyotes." "You sure?" Cal nodded. "You ever hear a coyote break a door latch?" Tom grunted. "Fair enough." He picked up his pen, wrote something on a pad. "We'll send someone up to set cameras. Maybe leave a trap if he sticks around." Cal hesitated. "Don't shoot him." Tom looked up. "Nobody said we would." "I mean it." Tom studied him a moment, then nodded slowly. "You've seen him up close, haven't you?" Cal didn't answer. Tom sighed. "You know how it is, Cal. Folks want to feel safe. Something that big walking around, it makes people nervous." Cal stared out the window. The highway cut through the hills in a long, perfect line, like a wound that never healed right. "Maybe it's not the bear that's out of place," he said softly. Tom didn't reply. That night, Cal dreamed of the highway again. Empty, shining wet under a sky that had no color. The bear stood in the center of it, facing the dawn. Cars passed through him like mist. When he woke, it was still dark. Wind rattled the window, carrying the faint sound of traffic from miles away. He sat up, listening. Somewhere in that endless hum of engines, he thought he heard another sound beneath it. Deep, steady, slow. The rhythm of something walking. And as he lay back down, eyes open to the ceiling, he realized the feeling that had haunted him all week wasn't fear or wonder. It was mourning. Not for the bear, for the world that had stopped noticing him. By the fourth morning, the cold had softened. The air was clearer, the kind of blue that only comes after a long frost, when everything still smells faintly of iron and thaw. The highway steamed where the sun hit it, mist rising from cracks in the pavement like breath. Cal Bennett drove the familiar stretch again, not because he needed to, but because he couldn't stop thinking about it. The bear, the prince, the quiet, the sense that something had shifted in the valley, and he was the only one who'd felt it. He pulled over near the turnout at mile 42. The ditch was half melted now, filled with brown water that reflected the pale morning sky. No tracks this time. The thaw had taken even the memory of them. He got out, shut the truck door gently, and stood listening. A single crow called somewhere down the slope. The wind off the ridge carried the smell of pine and damp earth. It was the kind of morning that looked peaceful until you realized what was missing. No deer moving through the trees, no songbirds, just stillness. He climbed the small rise on the far side of the highway, boots sinking into soft ground, and found himself looking down over the valley. The town lay just visible in the distance, roofs glinting dull silver in the light. Between him and that line of houses was the forest, bare, thinned, broken by the logging road that carved through it like a scar. Something big had moved through there recently. He could see it in the pattern of branches, the bent reeds, the faint disturbance in the ground. Not the sharp chaos of machinery, the slower, patient weight of something alive. He followed. The ground sloped gently, the air cooler under the pines. He could smell the river before he saw it. Cold, wide, fast now that the ice was gone. He stopped at the bank and looked across. The bear was there, on the far side where the trees thickened again. Standing in the shallows, head down, water running black around his legs. He moved with that same unhurried rhythm, like the world still belonged to him. Cal stayed where he was. The distance between them was small enough that he could see the wet sheen on the bear's fur, the flick of his ears when a crow called above. The yellow tag still hung from one ear, catching a thread of light each time he turned his head. He wanted to call out, to make a sound, anything, but the words stayed stuck somewhere behind his teeth. There was nothing to say. The bear lifted his head, sniffed the air. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the river. A brief, steady recognition. Not fear, not challenge. Just two creatures standing on the same line between silence and motion. Then the bear turned, stepped up the far bank, and disappeared into the trees. Cal stayed until the sound of the water filled everything again. By afternoon, clouds had gathered, turning the light flat and white. He drove into town, stopped at the diner again. Martha was wiping down the counter, the same slow rhythm as always. The radio muttered in the background. News about road repairs, weather warnings, nothing that mattered. "Any luck?" she asked. He shook his head. "Saw him again. By the river." She poured him coffee. "You tell Fish and Game? They'll do what they always do," he said. "Set traps, drive him off. Pretend that fixes something." Martha gave a small, tired smile. "You sound like your father." "Maybe he was right," Cal said quietly. "The land remembers longer than people do." They didn't talk much after that. When he left, the first drops of rain had started to fall. Slow, heavy, smelling of rust and thaw. He drove home with the window cracked, letting the cold air mix with the scent of wet soil. He reached his driveway just as the light was fading. Beyond the field, the forest began again, a dark wall of trunks and mist. The rain had turned to a fine drizzle. Something moved at the edge of the trees. He stopped, engine idling. The bear stepped out, slow, quiet, his fur dark with rain. He crossed the fence line and stood in the middle of the field, steam rising off his back. The distance between them was smaller now, maybe 50 yards. Cal didn't move. The bear lowered his head, sniffed the ground, then turned toward the far side, disappearing into the fog that hung low over the grass. No rush, no fear. Just movement. Steady and certain, like he belonged there. Cal sat in the truck until the last trace of him vanished. Then, he cut the engine and listened. Only the rain and the faint hiss of wind across the open field. By nightfall, the storm passed. The world smelled clean again. Cal stood on his porch with a cup of coffee gone cold. The sky was clear enough now that he could see the stars, scattered and distant, reflections on the black mirror of the valley. Somewhere far beyond the trees, a dog barked once, then went quiet. He thought about the bear, the way he'd crossed the highway, the way his shape filled the fog, how easy it was for something so large to vanish when no one was looking. He realized it wasn't the animal that haunted him. It was the silence that followed him. That vast, indifferent quiet of a world still moving, still beautiful, and already forgetting. He finished the coffee, set the mug down on the railing, and looked out toward the dark line of forest. "Safe travels," he said, though the words came out barely louder than breath. A wind moved through the pines, carrying the faint scent of rain and road salt, of something wild just out of reach. Then it was gone, leaving only the soft hum of the highway in the distance, a sound too constant for anyone to notice anymore. And somewhere out there, beneath the new stars, a bear kept walking north through the dark, one step at a time, across a world that had already forgotten to see him.